Welcome to The Explainer. When we think about the absolute titans of British engineering, names like Rolls-Royce or Aston Martin usually jump to mind first, right? But there's this hidden giant in the history of global engineering. We're talking about a company whose legacy stretches across 2 whole centuries, touching literally everything from the money in your pocket to the fastest machines on land, water, and up in the air. That company is D. Napier and Son. Today, we're going to dive right into the incredible legacy of this true British engineering powerhouse. So here's the big question. How exactly does a 19th century printing press manufacturer end up building the world's absolute most powerful World War II aircraft engines? It's a completely staggering transformation, and the answer to that question is exactly what we're going to unpack today, as we trace this wild, direct line from early steam power all the way to the skies. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll be covering the Napier engineering legacy, racing and the six-cylinder, the 1907 Napier 60 HP, conquering land and water, the aero engine era, and finally, we'll wrap up with Napier's modern survival. All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, the Napier engineering legacy. So picture this. It's 1808, and a Scottish-trained engineer named David Napier founds a precision engineering firm right in London. They're building heavy industrial stuff, think steam-powered printing presses, centrifuges, and even ammunition equipment for the Royal Arsenal. Fast forward a bit, and his son, James Murdoch Napier, takes over in 1867. Now, James was a brilliant engineer, absolutely, but he was kind of a terrible businessman. He actually considered salesmanship to be undignified. As you might guess, that didn't work out too well. By 1895, this once prosperous company had dwindled down to just 7 employees. And that left his son, Montague Napier, inheriting a deeply, deeply struggling business. Which brings us to Section 2, racing in the six-cylinder. Lucky for Napier, Montague didn't just inherit a failing business. He inherited his family's serious engineering talent. The real catalyst for their massive transformation was actually a totally chance meeting at a cycling club. Montague ends up meeting this guy, SF Edge. Edge is this ebullient, super energetic manager at Dunlop Rubber who amateur raced motor tricycles and cars on the side. Well, Edge manages to convince Napier to improve his French Panhard racing car. And Napier doesn't just make basic tweaks, he goes way beyond that. He completely replaces the tiller with an actual steering wheel and fits it with a vastly superior 8-horsepower vertical twin engine that he designed himself. Edge was literally so blown away by this that he and a colleague formed the Motor Power Company in 1900 with one goal: to buy and sell Napier's entire automotive output. Honestly, it was the ultimate perfect marriage of Edge's aggressive salesmanship and Napier's mechanical genius. Now, Edge was a smart guy. He knew the absolute best way to sell cars was to go out and win races. So in 1902, he enters a massive 6.44-liter Napier into the Gordon Bennett Trophy race. Piloting the car himself, Edge secures the very first British victory in international motorsport. And here's a really cool detail. To represent Britain, they painted the car a deep green. That is actually the historical birth of the iconic color we all know today as British racing green. This single, monumental victory generated such a massive surge in public demand that Napier literally had to build a huge new manufacturing plant in Acton, West London, just to keep up. But of course, Napier didn't just rest on those laurels. By 1904, they introduced something totally revolutionary. Now, to be clear, they didn't invent the six-cylinder engine, but they were the absolute first to make it a commercial success. This engine was remarkably smooth and flexible, especially when you compare it to the rough, violently vibrating motors everyone else was using at the time. It was so smooth, in fact, it earned the nickname the Noiseless Napier. Almost overnight, that engine cemented the brand as the ultimate English luxury car. Moving right along to Section 3, the 1907 Napier 60 HP. To really understand what made these machines so special, we've got to look under the hood at the mechanical specs of a surviving 1907 Napier 60 HP Type 21. This absolute beast packed a massive 7.7-liter inline-6 engine. By 1907, Napier had revised their earlier designs, stepping away from pushrod overhead valves and moving to a more conventional side valve or L-head layout just to get better reliability. They also fully redesigned the transmission. They fitted it with a 3-speed manual featuring a modern right-hand gate change, which made shifting so much more precise for the driver. But to really put this vehicle into proper context, we absolutely have to talk about the price. Just the chassis alone for the early 60-horsepower Type 21 cost an unbelievable £1,500. That is a completely staggering number for 1907, firmly anchoring the Type 21 at the very extreme end of the luxury market. I mean, for that amount of money back then, a buyer could have purchased a whole clutch of smaller, standard cars. But these wealthy buyers weren't just paying for a fancy badge. They were paying for unparalleled refinement. Period reviews were just raving about it. Take this quote from the Autocar. By reason of the extreme flexibility of its engine and the constant torque on the crankshaft, it will run as slowly and with more quietude than a Vauxhall in town. That specific ability to just glide quietly through a city without sputtering or shuddering made it incredibly desirable among the elites. People like Edinburgh's wealthy Usher family of brewers, who originally owned chassis 3044, couldn't get enough of them. Fast forward almost a full century, and the extreme rarity of these machines really becomes clear. Out of the 103 Type 21s ever built, only 4 are known to survive today. In 2003, that exact chassis 3044 crossed the block at a Christie's auction. And get this, even though it had essentially been sitting on jacks since 1931 and required a complete ground-up restoration, it still realized a price of £72,850. It remains a truly legendary piece of the Edwardian era. Okay, let's dive into Section 4, Conquering Land and Water. Now, Napier wasn't satisfied just dominating the roads. Our guy SF Edge realized that their incredibly potent engines were actually perfect for motor yachting, too. So, in 1903, the immensely talented driver Dorothy Levitt took the controls of a steel-hulled Napier powerboat and outright won the inaugural British International Harmsworth Trophy. By 1905, the brand was just totally dominating the water. The Napier 2 boat set a world water speed record at almost 30 knots. To put that into perspective, hitting 30 knots on the water in an open boat in 1905 was terrifyingly fast. Meanwhile, back on solid ground, they were proving not just raw speed, but absolute bulletproof reliability. In June of 1907, SF Edge took a 60-horsepower Napier to the newly opened Brooklands track to attempt this grueling 24-hour endurance record. Over a full day and night of non-stop driving, he covered 1,581 miles, averaging an astonishing 65.9 miles per hour. As you'd expect, this generated immense global publicity, and the record was so punishingly difficult to beat that it stood completely unbroken for 18 whole years. And that brings us to a massive turning point. Section 5, the aero engine era. When World War I broke out in 1914, the market for private luxury vehicles basically collapsed overnight. Napier managed to survive by taking on government contracts to build ambulances, trucks, and aircraft engines that were actually designed by other companies. But when those early contracted engines proved to be super unreliable, Napier did what they've always done best. They engineered their own solution. This massive scaling up of their factory operations during the war forever shifted the company's trajectory. They were done with the roads, they were heading for the skies. And the reason they could just confidently walk away from their famous automobiles was this absolute masterpiece, the Napier Lion. Designed in 1916, it was a superb, highly innovative W-block 12-cylinder aero engine. It was essentially 3 banks of 4 cylinders, all sharing one central crankshaft. It became a massive commercial success in the 1920s, literally powering a huge percentage of all Britain's interwar aircraft. And because the Lion produced such immense raw power, speed chasers quickly realized it was the perfect engine to just rip out of an airplane and bolt directly to a car's chassis. Throughout the late 1920s and 30s, the Napier Lion aero engine was repurposed to consistently shatter international land speed records. We're talking about powering iconic machines like Malcolm Campbell's Bluebird, Henry Segreve's stunning Golden Arrow, and John Cobb's legendary Napier Railton. As aircraft started getting much larger heading into World War II, Napier had to respond, and their response was arguably their greatest engineering triumph ever, the Sabre engine. This thing was an incredibly complex H-block 24-cylinder design. It utilized sliding sleeve valves instead of your traditional popping valves, which allowed it to breathe so much better at high speeds. Now, it was notoriously difficult to manufacture at first, but once they finally perfected it by 1944, it delivered a mind-bending 3,500 horsepower. It famously powered the fearsome Hawker Typhoon and Tempest fighter planes, making it an absolute legend of the skies. Finally, let's look at Section 6, Napier's modern survival. The transition to the jet age post-WW2 was definitely tough on piston engine makers. But in the post-war era, Napier just applied their genius to a brand new problem: high-performance diesels.
The result was the legendary Deltic engine, which was essentially 3 engines arranged in a massive triangle, used to tower naval boats and British rail locomotives. Over time, the company shifted its focus entirely to the technology that made those engines so powerful in the first place, forced induction. Through a series of corporate buyouts over the decades, Napier Turbochargers was formed. And today, they're still out there, operating as a vital manufacturer of highly specialized industrial turbochargers for the global marine and rail industries.
Think about that journey for a second. From David Napier's 1808 steam-powered printing presses to SF Edge's roaring Edwardian racers, up to the 3,500 horsepower heart of a WWI fighter plane, and finally settling on modern industrial turbochargers. Napier's ability to constantly pivot and solve the absolute most complex mechanical problems of their day is what maintained their legacy for over 200 years. It stands as a profound testament to the uncompromising endurance of British precision engineering. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other forgotten engineering giants are quietly shaping the technology of our modern world today?